Folks, today we're diving deep into some serious financial business, focusing on none other than the World Bank. Now, you might be asking yourself, why all the fuss about this old financial giant? Well, let me tell you, it's under some heavy fire from countries that aren't too thrilled with how things are run, especially those in the Global South and the BRICS nations. They're up in arms about what they see as a Western, particularly American, stronghold over the World Bank's big decisions. It's like the US is the quarterback, always calling the shots, which doesn't sit right with a lot of folks out there. Now, here's the kicker. The World Bank doesn't just lend money. It comes with strings attached, big ones. They tell these countries how to manage their economies. Think privatization, liberalization, and all that jazz. But what works in Washington doesn't always fit the bill elsewhere, leading many to say it's messing with their socio-economic vibe. So why is this happening? It's all about the power play, my friends. The US holds a whopping 16.5% of the votes at the World Bank, giving it a sort of veto power over major decisions. Imagine that, having the clout to say nay when it feels like it, influencing policies that impact millions. That's a lot of power for one country, and it's clear why others might feel a tad sidelined. And let's not gloss over who's running the show. The World Bank has always had an American at the helm, which sure doesn't help shake off this image of American dominance. But it's not just about feeling left out. These policies and decisions have real-world impacts, pushing many countries towards economic strategies that might not be their first pick. In response, we're seeing some new players on the block, like the new development bank, set up by BRICS countries as an alternative, hoping to level the playing field a bit. They're tired of the status quo and are shaking things up, trying to make global finance a bit more inclusive. Let's break down what's really happening with these economic strategies the World Bank and other big financial players are pushing on countries that, let's be honest, don't have the muscle to push back. It's all about opening up their markets to the big global players. This means lowering trade barriers, deregulating industries, and privatizing state-owned businesses. Sounds good on paper, right? But it often leaves local businesses and workers out in the cold, unable to compete with the heavyweights from overseas. Now, I've got to ask for a quick favor. If you're finding this discussion enlightening, smash that like button. Your likes and comments not only mean the world to us, they also help more people get informed. And if you haven't already, consider watching the whole video to support our channel. We really value your engagement, and it helps us keep bringing you these deep dives into what's happening around the world. Thank you for being part of our community. Take a look at what happens when you drop those import tariffs. Sure, consumers might get cheaper goods for a while, but what about the local farmers and manufacturers? They get hammered by the flood of foreign products, often sold at prices they can't match, because guess what? Those foreign companies are getting a sweet deal back home with subsidies. Now, about privatization. It's a fancy term for selling off public assets to private companies. Advocates will tell you it's more efficient and cuts government costs. But let's get real here. When you privatize essential services like water and electricity, it's not just about efficiency. We've seen prices skyrocket and service quality tank in places like Bolivia and Argentina, sparking massive protests. People don't take to the streets for no reason. And then there's austerity, the old cut today, hope for growth tomorrow approach. It means slashing government spending, pulling back on subsidies, and cutting jobs in the public sector. This isn't just about balancing books, it hits real people. In Greece, severe austerity measures threw folks into a decade of pain, job losses, reduced public services, you name it. And who suffers the most? Often it's the most vulnerable, women, children, the elderly, those who depend on the state the most. These policies aren't just numbers on a page, they're choices that affect millions of lives. Countries like Mexico, Tanzania, and Zambia have been through the ringer with these programs, seeing little of the promised stability or growth and a whole lot of hardship. So what's the takeaway here? These one-size-fits-all policies? They don't fit all. They often don't consider the unique needs, challenges, and contexts of the countries they're applied to. We need smarter, more tailored economic strategies that respect local conditions and aim for inclusive, sustainable growth. It's about time the big financial institutions start listening more and dictating less. Let's push for change that actually benefits the many, not just the few at the top. Stick with us as we dig deeper into these pressing issues and call for a fairer approach in global economics. All right, let's delve into another big critique of the World Bank: the lack of flexibility. Now, this isn't just about red tape. It's about being too slow on the draw when countries really need help, like during a crisis. Take Niger, for example. They had to tweak their entire 2023 budget when expected funds got hung up. It's moments like these when you really see the need for a system that can kick into gear fast and adapt to what's actually happening on the ground. But here's another twist. While the World Bank does open doors for big money to flow into big projects, like energy and infrastructure, it doesn't always get this right across the board. There's a lot of unevenness here, folks. Some areas get the golden ticket, while others are left holding the bag, staring at half-built bridges or power plants that don't really meet their needs. And here's the real kicker: the focus on these massive infrastructure projects. Sure, they look good on paper and in flashy PowerPoint presentations, but do they always make sense for the people living there? Not necessarily. We're talking about projects that can upend entire communities, mess with local ecosystems, and don't always spread the economic love around. Often, the big cities get bigger, and the small towns get the short end of the stick. Now, seeing all this, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the BRICS countries, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, decided they'd had enough and started their own club, the New Development Bank. They were tired of being minor leaguers in a game dominated by the big Western players. The NDB is their way of saying, we've got some economic muscle too, and we want a say in how things are done. It's all about creating a more level playing field in global finance, where more voices, especially from emerging economies, are heard loud and clear. This move by BRICS is a big deal. It's not just about funding projects. It's about reshaping the whole global financial landscape to better reflect today's world, where economic power isn't just held by a few Western countries. It's a push for a multipolar financial world where decisions are more democratic, more inclusive, and hopefully more effective in dealing with the unique challenges different regions face. So, as we watch these developments unfold, it's clear that the days of business as usual in global finance might be taking a turn towards something new, something hopefully better for everyone involved. All right, let's dive into the big moves the New Development Bank (NDB) is making. And folks, it's pretty impressive. They're not just sitting around talking about change. They're rolling up their sleeves and getting into the nitty-gritty of what developing countries really need, starting with bridging the massive infrastructure funding gap. We're talking about more than just roads and bridges here. The NDB is focusing on smart, resilient, and inclusive projects. That means things like climate-smart energy solutions and infrastructure that can stand up to natural disasters without leaving anyone behind. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The NDB is also pumping new energy into South-South cooperation. This is about strengthening ties between emerging markets themselves, not just relying on the usual Western financial lifelines. It's a game changer, enhancing economic partnerships directly between the Global South nations, helping them build each other up through investments and shared expertise. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The NDB isn't just another bank, it's a statement. It's about shifting the balance of economic power, providing a counterweight to what some see as Western hegemony in global finance. With a governance structure that says no single country can throw its weight around, the NDB is laying down a new way to do business, one that's more democratic, more equitable. And then there's the cherry on top, the creation of new financial tools like the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, CRA. Think of it as a safety net for its members, providing a cushion against balance of payments crises. It's similar to what the IMF does, but without those tough conditions that often come attached to Western aid. Let's not forget the historical backdrop here. The World Bank didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was born out of the Bretton Woods Conference back in 1944. That was a moment when the Allies were figuring out how to rebuild and reshape the post-World War II economic landscape. The conference laid the groundwork for institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. But while these institutions were set up to promote global growth and stability, over the decades, many feel they've fallen short for a lot of countries that need help the most. So, when we look at what the NDB is doing, it's not just about funding. It's about rewriting some of the old rules of the economic game. It's about giving more countries a voice and a fair shot at growth. As these efforts unfold, we'll be watching closely, reporting on how these shifts might lead to a more balanced global economic playing field. Folks, let's talk about something you might not hear every day. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, more commonly known as the World Bank. Back in the day, right after World War II, the world was a mess, especially Europe. It was all bombed out and in dire need of a rebuild. That's where the World Bank stepped in, starting with a big loan to France in 1947 to get their economy back on its feet. They did a heck of a job in Europe, I'll tell you that. But as time moved on, so did the World Bank. By the 1950s and 1960s, they were all about helping the developing world. They built roads, bridges, you name it, trying to spark economic growth and cut down poverty. They even expanded, creating outfits like the International Finance Corporation in '56 to get private investments going, and others like the International Development Association in 1960 to help the really poor countries with easy loans and grants. Now, here's where it gets a bit sticky. In the 1980s and 1990s, they started pushing these structural adjustment programs. They told countries, if you want our money, you've got to cut government spending, privatize your businesses, and open up to trade. Sounds good in theory, right? But it wasn't all roses. These programs got a lot of flack for making the rich richer and the poor poorer, and some folks said they were just too pushy and meddlesome. Nowadays, the World Bank has shifted gears again, focusing on fighting poverty and promoting sustainable development. They're big on tackling global issues like climate change and pandemics, and they're guided by these big plans, first the Millennium Development Goals, and now the Sustainable Development Goals. They're trying to make a real difference, but let's be honest, it's a tough world out there, and the question remains, can they really pull it off? You know, folks, let's dive into something quite telling about today's world. It's about the big boys at the World Bank and the voices that are starting to rumble from the developing countries. There's been a push to shake things up within the World Bank's governance, to really reflect what the world looks like today, not just the Western bigwigs running the show. Despite some effort to reform, many nations in the Global South and those BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are saying it's just not enough. They see a system that still lets the US and other Western powers hold the reins too tightly, making decisions that don't always line up with the needs of developing nations. We're talking about things like forcing countries to open their markets, privatize their assets, and tighten their belts, actions that can widen the gap between the rich and the poor instead of closing it. And here's another kicker. The World Bank loves its big infrastructure projects, but sometimes these projects don't mesh well with the local needs or sustainability goals. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Just doesn't work, folks. This lack of flexibility and the bank's sometimes sluggish response in crisis situations have left a lot of folks wanting more. That's why the BRICS countries went ahead and started their own bank, the New Development Bank, aiming to be what they see as a fairer and more responsive alternative to the World Bank. They want a system that actually listens and adapts to the global economic shifts and realities on the ground. As the world keeps spinning and the global economy evolves, it's crystal clear the World Bank needs to step up its game. It's got to truly embrace equitable and sustainable development if it wants to stay relevant. What do you folks think? Can the old guard learn new tricks, or is it time for a bigger shakeup? Let's hash it out. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. We sincerely appreciate you joining us today.